Greetings and salutation. Welcome to yet another episode of the Snarp Fangle Podcast. David here, and joining me is a very special guest. He's a local pastor and a longtime friend of mine. May I introduce the magnificent man of God, Nicholas Kringle. How you doing, Nick?
Great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I think I'd just like to start off with tell the Snarp Fangle audience a little bit about yourself.
All right, well, I'm kind of the easiest way to probably describe me as a jack of all trades. I have a little bit of experience in a whole bunch of different things. Grew up in the area here, kind of a little farming town. Joined the military when I was 18. Ended up going into airborne school, Ranger Indoctrination Program. Went overseas a couple times. Then when I got out, worked a couple warehouse delivery jobs. Did that for a little bit. Then worked for the city of Seattle as a bus driver. That was kind of fun. Interesting experience. Then ended up moving back to California, back here where we live in, and pretty much did a few odds and end jobs, and then ended up coming in, getting into ministry when our last pastor just left. I felt for a long time that I was called to become a pastor. I kind of resisted it for a long time, and so that was kind of the step where it all came to fruition, and was just the ultimate point where I had my realization that that's what I'm going to do, and I submitted to it. And so since then, I've pretty much been a pastor for the last 3-4 years, something like that, and it's been an experience. My background as far as church and all that stuff was I started out kind of actually Baptist. Then we went to Assembly of God for a while. And then I actually was Episcopalian for most of my junior high to high school years. And then kind of floated around non-denominational, tried a few different things in the military, other denominations. But then again, I kind of ended up coming back to Assembly of God, which is where I'm currently a pastor at with that denomination. So I have an interesting perspective on say I'm all for all the Pentecostal stuff. I don't necessarily always jump up and down and sing like that, but I tend to worship a little bit more Baptist / Episcopalian, or mellow Baptist, because again, Baptist kind of has like Episcopal or like Pentecostals. They have a wide variety. You have your basic just sit there and worship, and then their dance around and worship. So, so I'm not against any of most of all the Pentecostal stuff. So.
Yeah, I feel like Pentecostals kind of get a bad rap in certain circles because you just see like a little cross section of what the Pentecostal church experience is like. Like you might see, the speaking in tongues, or you might see the flag wavers and the ribbon dancers, and be like, what are they smoking?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, there's many different things. I said, I definitely draw the line, if you're using snakes and stuff like that, that was the old joke for Pentecostals. So.
Yeah, those.
That's a little too far out there.
I would call those a slightly different kind of Pentecostal. But yeah, I myself grew up in Pentecostal churches, so it's like I've seen it all. There's a wide variety. There's the wild people, but then there's also people who are much more reserved. And I think I was like that in church for a long time. I subscribed to the theology, and yet at the same time, I never really felt the need to jump up and down,
Yeah. That's definitely, especially a thing like you kind of mentioned with speaking like in tongues and stuff, because a lot of people who have seen that, you've seen it misused in many ways, people trying to get their own personal agenda across, and that's where, again, kind of just the purity of what is the heart behind it, which I think is a lot of, what Christianity actually comes down to is what is the reason for you doing that, which, again, sometimes to people doesn't look legit, but God knows, again, the heart, and so I think that's where it comes, even with the flag waving and all that stuff, that's a little more on the unique. I think it still has its place. It's just, learning to, what is the reason for it? Are you doing it for attention, or are you doing it for to glorify God? So.
Yeah, and also I think too, I think sometimes we like to think of ourselves as a lot more important than we are. So, we'll look at the flag wavers and the, people who pray in tongues rather loudly and be like, oh, look at those people flaunting and making a spectacle of themselves. Don't they know that self-control is a fruit of the Spirit? I'm glad I'm not like them, Lord. But
Yeah.
then, it's kind of, you get to a point where it's like, okay, you got to learn, like, when do I call out something that I think is not quite above board, and when do I say it's not my place to judge, And I think that comes down to discernment and just learning to trust God instead of leaning on your own understanding.
Yeah. And like it kind of we're talking about on Sunday, it's each person, is a different part of the body. And so different parts of the body have different activities as far as, mouths are supposed to be loud and kind of obnoxious, especially to, like an ear or something like that, it's like, but I think it's like each part has a function, and it's finding out what your part in the body is and how to work in that God has, again, put you here and designed you for. Because again, we're all put here for a reason, I believe, and that, reasons ultimately is, to serve the Lord. And so how are you best called to serve the Lord? Why has God put you here, and for what reason? That's kind of where I go along those lines with it. And that's why I have a lot of grace for people with different things too. And I let a lot of things kind of slide in that regard. Because again, I think of the biggest thing I think of is like, I think of it as kind of like a bullseye. In the middle section, you have Christ died for your sins, rose again, and all that. And that's the really important stuff, which you can't flex on very much, or you can't flex on at all if you're going to be a Christian, because otherwise you end up with watering down the scriptures. But with the other stuff, it gets a little more loose. Like everybody always talks about, eschatology and all that stuff. And that's one of the big areas where, again, it ultimately doesn't matter for your salvation. It's like, it's a cool conversation piece and like all that, but it shouldn't be a salvation issue or something that you break relationships with. Again, we talked about other things too. Like we talked about, like this week at the church, we were talking about baptism, because we have baptisms coming up, and how some people believe that baptism is a really important thing, which it is to a point, but it's not a salvation issue.
Yeah. And I mean, really, I feel like with things like baptism, it's like, yeah, it's important, but about the only time I think you should really be in call out heresy mode with baptism is if it's something serious, like someone's trying to say that you shouldn't do it or something,
Yeah.
It's clearly commanded as a practice in Scripture. So, that's an easy line to draw, but then you get into the weeds a little bit, because the actual text of Scripture doesn't really define what baptism is in terms which would satisfy the modern mind. In ancient times, they sort of just took it for what it was. It was commanded. And so you'll have people arguing that say, see, the early church believed in baptismal regeneration because they didn't believe it was symbolic. But, that's confusing the way we think with the way they thought,
Totally.
It's like, just because they didn't believe it was a symbol doesn't mean that they believe that it literally saved you. It was simply a different way of thinking about it. They didn't put too much thought into the whole symbolic versus the literal kind of thing like we do now,
Yeah, I think it's very similar. A current aspect of that is kind of like the 7 Mountain Mandate or any of that type of stuff, where people, if you're doing that to bring Christ back, that is not the right way to do it. But we're still called to bring people to Christ, and in bringing people to Christ, we're supposed to bring kingdom to earth. So we're trying to make the earth as similar, I feel, to heaven as we can. And so in some ways, we are called to change, the 7 different areas of the world, and bring it into alignment with Christ as much as we can. Which again, we know we're in a fallen world, and the world's always going to resist it. but I think it just is better world if those areas are more in alignment with Christ, which again, not to bring him back, but simply for the fact that if we're sharing the gospel with others and doing our Christian job, basically, that should reflect in the world that we live in. So
Yeah, it's kind of like the whole faith versus works thing, because like the Catholic Church is kind of famous for taking the passage about faith and works in James and being like, see, faith alone is heresy. But, it's like, it's all about how you think of it. Like, works are important, but works don't save you.
yes.
But at the same time, if they're not there, there's a problem of some kind.
I mean, something's not in alignment, yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that the works themselves actually save you. And it's the same way with what we do in the world, Jesus said, if I cast a spirit out of you, if I cast a demon out of you by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. So there's a very real sense that as we're living the way Jesus called us to live, that we are expanding God's kingdom here on this earth. And so if that's not happening, then we can say, okay, what's the reason for that?
Yeah,
but at the same time, we're not doing that to literally hasten the return of Christ,
Yeah, that's one of the things my wife Nicole and I were talking about this morning was that, yeah, if you're doing it to bring Christ back, then that means you're trying to control the outcome of it. And the whole thing is that it's God's in control of when he comes back. God knows when he's sending, Jesus back. It's like, it's not that there's nothing we can do per se to speed that up. And it's like, because again, that's in our control and it's not in our control, it's in his control. And so, yeah, I think that's where a lot of it comes down to, again, is that whole submitting to him, which is the big thing that recently, I said, God's really been showing me, is the reminder that, again, we're not really called to be independent. We're called to be reliant, specifically on him and on each other. It's like, Acts' whole thing was they were a community, working with each other and all that stuff. And everything in Scripture points to not being alone. Because even Adam, when he was by himself, God's like, this isn't good for man to be alone. He needs somebody to be with him. And so he, other than a dog, or a lion or whatever, he had all the animals and all the green thumb stuff of the world, but he needed a fellow human to be with him.
It even mentions, too, that, God has man name all the animals, and then after Adam's finished naming all the animals, it says a suitable companion for him was not found.
Yeah.
So, yeah, even the idea that a dog could be a suitable companion for a man, they tested that out in the garden, and it was not so.
Yeah. Just think of like John Wick or any of those like legend and all those. He's got his dog. It's like, it's like, hey. One of the things, when humans also, when we get by ourselves again, we get kind of crazy because we need that interaction. We need someone to talk to, and other than a dog, someone who could talk back. Do some resistance to our thought process and challenge us, I think. Whereas, an animal typically doesn't challenge you. Even a dog, they're a little bit like a kid, but still not quite the same. They can't talk back as much or any of that stuff. It's like,
yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. You have this movement I see nowadays where, cause it's not like these people have never existed, but I think they're becoming more bold and they're putting their ideas out there more, just because of the internet.
Yeah.
Is more pervasive in our society now. And so you have these people who are like basically putting out there the idea that, my pets are all I need, humans suck, that kind of a thing. And it's like, I get it because people do suck,
Yeah.
We are clearly imperfect. And so when we get together, inevitably we're going to rub each other the wrong way. It's just bound to happen at some point.
Totally.
But it's like, it's interesting though, because I feel like that's kind of an integral part of our design too, is if we don't have that, then we never grow.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, it's definitely something because it's like you said, it's like even though we need each other, it's like we'd also need our alone time as well. So it's again finding that balance. Like most things in life, it's finding that middle ground, right? And basically some perfect balance between the two sides that really is where you need to be. You need enough social and enough non-social, so that you can get your own thoughts in order and stuff like that. Because that's one of the things for me. I need a little bit more non-social than I do social typically, because I have to process my own thoughts a lot. Otherwise, it gets kind of jumbled up in there. And so I definitely need much more alone time. But again, I also need that social time. It's kind of funny because recently we've been doing less. Was it 2 weeks ago? I think it was. I was basically at the house like all week, and I wasn't able to get out in the social world, and which is weird because I'm usually like the other way. I want to be home and I want to do all that stuff, but I was like inviting people over, and Nicole, tends to be more social. She's like, "Stop inviting people over. I need a couple days by myself." I was like, "All right." I was like, that was kind of fun because usually, again, I'm the other way around. Usually, I love being. I need the alone time, which again is important to me to have the time to self-reflect and stuff like that and get my thoughts in order. Even again, if I'm not really necessarily doing anything, I just to sit there and let the thoughts kind of run through my mind and work themselves into the categories they need to go into. Which in some ways is actually one of the interesting things when we first started getting into ministry. We had helped start up a local store that was here. And during that time, God was showing me particularly that I had to not compartmentalize my life. And my life, I needed to have it all the same compartment, which was kind of a challenge because typically, especially with like the military, I was very good at keeping this is military stuff. When you're home, it's home stuff and like that. And over the years, I guess it was probably 4 years ago now, God has been showing me that it's, at least especially going into ministry, it's important not to have the compartmentalization, at least again, as much. There's a spot for it, obviously, but overall, it's to living your life the way that you're living it no matter what. So the same way in work as well as in life. Which again works a little bit easier, I feel, sometimes for ministry, because ministry, you're supposed to be living a Christian life. You're supposed to be doing that, where if you have like work or whatever, you can have your work persona, you can have your home persona and all that. Whereas ministry, it ends up becoming a little bit more hypocritical. I don't know if that's technically the word, but where you can, because the other thing too is I love working. Working was one of the things I love because working, the way I described it is it's not real. It's a different world when you're at work. You don't have all the baggage you do of like if you're at home. At home, you have to all the bills and stuff you have to worry about and all that. But at work, you're literally just doing your 9 to 5 or whatever your time slot is. And that's what you can focus on and kind of ignore all the other chatter of the world. It's like for these 8 hours, this is my job and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's a little easier to focus on that. Whereas especially when you get into ministry, it's much more of a kind of chess / living game. So it's all connected a little bit more. So for me, that was one of the things that, because I do appreciate physical labor and stuff like that. I appreciate doing building things and creating things because it's just nice to see something like immediate, like you do something and it happens. Like you pick up your yard, you pick up all the leaves in the yard, and then you can physically see something that you did. In ministry, sometimes you don't get as much of the immediate result because again, it's much more like agriculture or something like that, where you plant the seed and then you water it forever, and eventually something pops up. You're like, hey, it changed, and then you get to see it grow a little bit, but it's a pretty slow process. Whereas doing anything like normal job stuff, I feel sometimes you get a lot more immediate gratification from it.
So, I guess actually, yeah, I'd like to actually move into. You talked about making things, creating things. So I've noticed that you have been getting into 3D printing a lot. And, that's kind of a fascinating topic. So I guess just if you want to just tell us, what's the story? How'd you get into the whole 3D printing thing? Let's start with that.
Well, it kind of goes back to probably back when I was a kid. My grandpa was a machinist, and so he could create everything. He was very creative in that regard. So I've always had kind of a creative aspect to my life as far as wanting to create things, make things. So my brothers all can make unique things. My grandpa taught us how to repair all sorts of things. You know, the old MacGyver way, duct tape and baling wire and, you know, some bubble gum. One of the things as I got older, I had to learn how to, it's if you have the money, it's actually nicer sometimes just to buy the new part if you're able to do that. Growing up, we were a little poor, so, and cheap also in that regard. So we would create the things instead. And what 3D printing for me anyways, this kind of sparked is some of that stuff which we had kind of just baling wired and stuff together. You can actually design it and print it off with plastic, or even they're getting into even more different filaments and stuff like that now, which are pretty cool because you can even do carbon fiber if you get the really expensive stuff and like that. So you can make things pretty strong. But yeah, so 3D printing basically though is making plastic into anything pretty much. And so how that's done is through usually like a CAD program. Blender's kind of the free one that I use. It's very complicated to get to learn, but once you learn it, it's cool and it's unlimited things you can create, which actually worked out because back when I was driving bus, I was learning how to use Blender because I had like a split shift. So I had the morning shift and like an evening shift I had to do when I was driving bus. So I had like 6 hours in the middle, which I had time to kill at work, which luckily we had a nice work environment. They had a gym and all that stuff. So I got to work out. And then during some of my slow time, I would work on Blender. And this is kind of before 3D printing came out. But it was just like 3D rendering programs. So you learned how to make things in 3D programs. So just like a CAD type thing like that. It's a little more focused towards like video games and fun stuff. But so I was already kind of working on that anyways. And then 3D printers kind of came along, and as they got cheaper and cheaper, I think 6 years ago, something like that, my wife had got us one for Christmas, which was really cool. And so we got to kind of start testing it out. A friend of mine had given me one, but it was kind of like in pieces, and I didn't really know enough about it probably 10 years ago. And so I have the parts out in the shop, and we've actually been working on trying to get that one going too recently. But the simplest way is that you just get a 3D printer. You have to kind of level the bed each time, which is kind of a pain in the neck. Unless you get a fancier one, the more expensive printers you get more options, obviously. So you don't have to level them. They have self-levelers and stuff like that. Then the easiest way, which for a long time I used to do, was you just go online, and anymore there's lots of files. Like Thingiverse is one of the ones that is the main site I use. There's a couple other ones that where you can get files that people have already done. So you just kind of scroll through the clip art of the different things that they've done, and you can download that onto your computer, and then you run it through a splicer program, which again depends on which printer you have. Kira's usually a pretty good solid one that works for most printers. Mine's a kind of a little bit of an off-brand, so I have to use a special one. But that puts it into like a G-code file, which is what the printers read. So you get an STL file, and then you have to transfer it into the splicer program, which makes it a G file, and the G file downloads into the printer and then prints out the item you want layer by layer. There's a little bit of creativity you have to do with the print sometimes, because like if you're doing a bolt, because you can make anything on it. So there's all sorts of like hardware. There's again action figures. There's cosplay. There's pretty much anything your mind can think of that you can print with these. But there's some again understanding of how the machine works. So what 3D print does is it prints one layer at a time, and they're really thin layers. And so certain things like a bolt, if you build the bolt straight up and down, then it's going to make it weak, and so it can break easily. So typically like a bolt, you'd want to print actually sideways, because then when you actually screw the nut on there, it's going to be stronger because it has to go across the different layers. Whereas if it's up and down, then it'll break off potentially. And so there's a little bit of that, which again, I've kind of learned over the time, but it's fairly cheap to get into starting out. It's definitely much more of one of those crafts that's like an upfront cost. I haven't made too many things from scratch. Like I said, using Blender, I made a couple pieces to fix things around. But it's a lot of work to make the 3D render something specifically. It's really cool though, because like once it's done, and then you can kind of just, again, you can either sell it or give it on the free sites that they have like that and share it with others. And so for the most part, I've gained to the point where I'm starting to create more of my own things, taking the time to figure that out. Whereas in the last few years, I've pretty much just used other people's STL files from the internet. But it's kind of cool, like I said, especially because they're getting into more different materials now. Because typically I use PLA, which is plastic. Basic. I can't remember what the acronym is, but it's plastic basically. You can also get a little bit more rubber. They have ABSs. They get, like I said, they're also gone to where they can do carbon fiber and stuff like that. It all depends again how expensive of a printer you get. Which, if I ever get to the point where I can have a carbon fiber one, then we can make some really cool stuff. But like, it's just been really kind of cool because in some ways, bring up a little more political stuff is like, because, obviously people then take advantage of it and then like making guns and stuff like that out of it, which is a whole nother discussion. But it's kind of interesting and kind of a cool idea that you can pretty much whatever your mind can think of, you can make with these things. Which, again, obviously, it's funny because I was making a bunch of props actually for a VBS we were having, and I had left a couple of them in my car, and I didn't think of it. It's like it gets pretty hot around here in the summer, and so since this stuff gets really hot when it kind of makes it, it has a weakness that if it gets hot, it warps. And so, like I had a couple of the items I made that they ended up warping in the sun just because the car got so hot, which is actually worked out for my benefit. It didn't mess them up. It actually made them kind of cooler in that regard. But
interesting. Yeah, I did see that you had a whole bunch of like gears and various things that you had printed off for VBS. So was that all just stuff that you had found on the internet?
Yeah, because I said it's a lot of work to make things, and so for the most part, I just so far have just been using other people's things. I've been working on making things like I said, the one thing I used was there was one of the door handles at the church was broken and it needed a special piece because I had combined two different door handles that didn't really go together. And it needed a special piece, which forever has been giving us a headache. And so I couldn't find a metal one or any of that stuff. So I just did all the measurements on it, which again took me an hour or so to do the measurements and generate it. But then now we have that piece and it's been working fine since. It hasn't even broken or any of that stuff. So. But yeah, as far as the VBS, Vacation Bible School, for those who are wondering what VBS stands for, everything there was already other people had created. And so I just utilized it. Some of the things like there was this cool heart that I printed. It was actually more like a human heart looking. But that one was actually like a really miniature. And I actually blew it up. Because that's the other cool thing is like some of the stuff are like miniatures. And then you can scale everything in the Splicer program, which makes it super cool. There was the hot air balloon things that we did, which those I edited. I took the program back into Blender, and at the top it had kind of like hooks. Instead of hooks, I put loops or circles on the top, so that way the strings were easier to tie to. Because my problem with the hooks was it kept popping off the hook. Mm-hmm. So that was something I modified the program, which is the other nice thing about a lot of the free programs or the free STL files is you can modify them, and then with like Thingiverse, you can actually also then re-download that back into the open source stuff. So then it has like an alternative to whatever the current file is. So it gives people different ideas. They don't have to work. So it's definitely been kind of an experience also, kind of into the whole open source thing. Because you always get that balance between, open source and then also, making a profit off things. And so, but the thing is, like, I've looked at some of the STL files like to buy and stuff, and those sites really I haven't found are that much better than the free sites. The free sites have definitely a lot more stuff. There is a difference sometimes in, again, the 3D rendering program, which I think that's just normal. Like, like a game, some games have really good detail on their 3D objects and other games don't. And so definitely only the ones you pay for typically are going to have a lot better detail in that regard. So if you're going really for detail with it, that's the other thing I need to get in, or I'm starting to get into, is the how to finish it. So you print it, and usually it's, if you did your spacings, your things all pretty good, it comes out decent, but sometimes you get these little like lines across it from the different layering, and then there's ways that you're supposed to sand it, and you can paint it and all that stuff too, which makes it look cooler and better. And so I'm learning how to do that stuff too. But again, for the most part, I've only been I'm now again where I feel confident enough to start tweaking with things a little bit more with that. I have a better understanding of it now. So it definitely is a bit of a learning curve, which pretty much you just print off a bunch of things, and that's kind of how you learn. At least that's how I learn. I learn the hard way. I don't usually always learn the easy way.
So yeah, so I guess the question is do you see yourself as just continuing to do this as a hobby, or do you have plans to eventually turn this into some kind of business? And if so, what thoughts might you have on what you could possibly do?
I think mainly for a hobby. Like I said, my family, we tend to be like creators and like making things. If I come up with something really ingenious, I might put it on, try to sell the files. But I think for the most part, it's just to kind of embracing the open source part of it and just giving, saving people time from having to take the time to recreate these things. And so you just put it out there and share with others. And then again, hopefully bettering each other's lives and making things a lot easier. I did look into kind of like because there are plenty of opportunities if you wanted to go into business kind of doing that. I was talking with a friend of ours who they did injection molding for a long time. And there's a fine line for like 3D printing where it's cost effective. I think like up to like 300 items. If you get over 300 items, injection mold is actually much better. But it's definitely really good for any R&D to kind of figure out what you want the thing to look like. Because those injection molds are very expensive to make. And that's very time consuming. So, but if you're mass producing them, probably over 300 items, injection molding, at least used to be back when I looked at it a few years ago, was the better way to go for that. It's just as far as cost efficiency.
Yeah. Well, I suppose injection molding is probably the way to go once you actually have the mold made. You don't have to deal with all the various things, the same kinds of things you would have to, I imagine that you would have to deal with in 3D printing. I imagine that injection molding probably produces a finished product much more easily.
Yeah, and it can do it a lot kind of cleaner too in many ways. Because like I said, like the piece that I created for the door handle, I had to print and reprint, getting the sizes all right, probably like 20 times, before I finally got the right dimensions per se on it. Because you can measure it and you can put it into the CAD program, make it all the things the same. But because I even used like a caliper and stuff like that, so I was trying to get pretty precise. But you still have to like fine tune things, and so then you have to wait, 20 minutes or whatever for however long, depending on how big the item is to print. And so I had to do that, probably about 20 times to finally get it to where it was just perfect. So yeah, it definitely is a tedious project. Getting it going. Again, the thing is, once you get it fine-tuned and stuff, then it's available for the rest of the life. It's like, and beyond. So it's leaving your legacy in some ways out there on the internet. So.
Yeah. All right. I suppose we could just jump right into talking about some current events. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good.
So yeah, what's been happening? There's been so many things happening recently. It's hard to keep track of it all. Yeah. So did you hear that Israel, they didn't outright say that they did it, but we know. Did you hear that Israel assassinated those two military guys?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Because again, Israel typically, from everything I've been learning, doesn't confirm or deny when they do operations against, especially Iran or any of that stuff. And the other thing too is particularly the one in Iran that they did, where they took out the Hamas leader. That one apparently they blew him up in his own room, which is crazy. Which means that they got some big security flaws. And it was apparently, the rumor is that they put the bomb in there like 2 months ago. So like 2 months ago, they knew he was going to be in there, or they knew he used this room a lot.
Interesting.
And it was specifically just for that room. It only blew up that room. And so it was kind of an interesting thing in that regard. So they definitely had some insider information. And apparently there's more. Today I was hearing about the other guy who got killed and how he apparently like avoided technology, like the plague to because he knew that you could be tracked pretty much through everything technological. And they still ended up finding him. And so they're now going through all the security people and all that stuff because there's only, like 10 people supposedly who knew where he was when he got killed. And so it's definitely interesting. Again, the Israeli, I don't know, I can't think of their name right now, but their special forces guys are
Mossad.
Mossad, yeah, their Mossad are pretty on point as far as like they aren't afraid to do some crazy stuff to go find you and get you.
Yeah, I'd heard that the Hezbollah guy that they killed, I heard they did it via drone strike, which is kind of interesting that they were able to just pinpoint his location and just send a drone to shoot a missile at him or whatever it did,
Yeah, because that's what they're saying. Is like supposedly he'd left the main cleric temple or whatever, and he had gone specifically to this place because he knew that they were hunting him, type thing. And then they blew him up in the farmhouse or whatever where he was. Yeah, with the drone, which is again only supposedly 10 people knew. So they definitely have some leaks in their security system, which they've already kind of known. Like again, Israel's is forever been really good at infiltrating different security networks, especially like Iran and Hamas, or not as much Hamas, but Hezbollah and all that stuff. Because again, Hezbollah is technically one of the bigger axis of some people call them axis of evil, but it's not. I can't remember what their technical term is, but people who are supported by Iran, and so it's kind of interesting the dynamic there, because that's all heating up too since October 7th when they had that Hezbollah has been launching missiles across into Israel, which again is nothing per se new, but it's been definitely escalating more so. And then now they just took out their leader plus the Hamas leader, so people are definitely, and so now everybody's anticipating Iran's counterattack. Which again, last time they did that, they at least gave everybody kind of heads up, like, "Hey, we're sending all these drones, like for warning." So they kind of like wink, wink, nod, nod, like we're just doing this to make us look powerful, but we want you to shoot them down, pretty much. But this next one, that's the debate. Is like, are they actually going to give it a heads up, or are they just going to kind of do it and see what happens? But
yeah, that's the weird thing about Middle Eastern politics. As far as I can tell, basically, anytime something happens, like it seems like the people demand a show of strength or retaliation from the leaders of their country. And, people are getting assassinated, deposed all the time. So you can imagine that someone who's the leader or part of the leadership in one of these countries doesn't want that to happen to them. So if the population is clamoring for some response to something that happened, you can bet that they're going to do it. And so at this point, it all kind of depends on whether Iran is like how understanding Iran is, because it could be like when Israel attacked that what was it, the Lebanese embassy?
yeah,
and then
killed the general. Yeah, there.
Yeah, and then Iran sent like a missile, basically sent a bunch of rockets at him, but it was it was more like a kind of, they're doing it because they have to, basically.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't know. It remains to be seen whether Iran's going to do the same thing or they're going to actually like mean business this time.
Yeah, and that's the debate on that, because again, that was a general who was killed, and they did that. They did the drone swarms, missiles, and all that stuff. And so that's why actually we've sent some more troops and ships stuff over there, because we think it's going to at least potentially be more missiles and drones along those lines that would need shot out of the sky than last time, because I can't remember how many it was last time, but it was quite a bit, and like 98% of them all got shot down or whatever, which is interesting because one interesting thing is with that is that Jordan actually helped shoot him down, as well as a couple other people around the area that were helping out with that. I think UK was helping and all that. But yeah, the big kind of surprise for me was Jordan, because that's kind of a Middle Eastern country, but they're also little bit tend to be a little bit more friendly to Israel, and because of that, the other countries don't typically like them. Like it's like, but they have definitely a fine line balance they have where they support Israel or have started supporting Israel a lot more than typically they had before.
Yeah, that's another thing that's interesting about the dynamic over there is like, Israel pretty much stands alone, and it seems like at times, like the entire region is their enemy almost.
Yeah.
But then you have like these sort of almost fractured, sort of tenuous alliances that seem to happen. Like you said, Jordan has shown them some support, and then Egypt is kind of interesting too, because Egypt is sort of maintaining almost like a tactical sort of neutrality in the whole situation.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. But I know some people that I've seen online have definitely been saying, "Oh, yeah, this is definitely going to be turning into a regional war here pretty soon," which I guess we don't know, but
definitely looking that way though.
Yeah.
Pretty much like everywhere is escalating. Again, you got that. You got Ukraine. You got even the UN, NATO, and all that escalating with the whole supporting that they're doing for Ukraine. And then even like Poland's now getting involved, where Poland has Ukraine's given them authorization to shoot down missiles and stuff like that fly through Ukraine. So definitely all areas are heating up, because again, even the Pacific, you got China testing the waters in different areas, the Philippines and Taiwan. And so it's like there's many parts of the world that are potentially could be a powder keg, just waiting to go off. The one wrong thing and it all goes bad. I was like,
yeah, and it's weird too how for a while it seemed like the war in Ukraine wasn't really going anywhere.
yeah,
But it seems like now they're starting to scale things up. I guess Ukraine just got its first shipments of F-16s. So that's definitely going to spice things up in that conflict.
Yeah, one of the other interesting things was technically Israel has like updated their air system, and so they were getting rid of, or potentially before they went or on the edge of going to war with Hezbollah, is they were getting rid of the Patriot missile systems that they had. They were going to retire them, and so the U.S. was trying to make a deal where Ukraine could buy, or we'd buy the Patriot systems back from them, because the Patriot systems come from America, but we're going to buy them back from Israel and then give them to Ukraine to help with their air defense. Was one of the other potential solutions. But one of the interesting things with that apparently is apparently Israel has been pretty good at playing the neutral card as far as Ukraine, Russia, because they have some deals with Russia and stuff like that, and they're walking that fine line themselves, keeping neutrality with Russia, so it's not one more enemy, to deal with, because Iran, obviously, and Russia and China and all of them are all kind of allied together. And so it's just kind of interesting, again, the overlap of all the different countries and how, again, in one area they're united, in other areas they're separated, which is good. Pretty much just a normal thing for life. We have areas where we agree with people and areas where we disagree with people.
Yeah.
This just has the potential for people dying with it. So
yeah, it's a little when you're talking about countries with modern armed forces, it becomes a little bit more than simple disagreement.
Yeah. Well, that's been one of the interesting things with the whole Ukraine NATO thing, is that the countries of NATO have actually, since Trump went out of office, when he was in office, he was cutting a lot of the funding for NATO and making them trying to make them pay for things and upgrade their militaries and all this stuff. And so in anticipation of him potentially winning the next election, they've actually have been doing that. They've been upping, their armies and stuff like that. Germany supposedly is looking, I can't remember if they actually did yet or not, but they're looking at starting up the mandatory military service again, which they haven't done in a while, which, always makes everybody a little nervous every time Germany, starts building up the military just because of the last two world wars. But,
yeah.
A lot of the countries, though, have been personally putting more money into their defense, their own personal defense and stuff like that. So they've been working on as they call it, Trump-proofing the NATO in case Trump comes in. Because he's talked about that. He wants to pull the funding, or a lot of the funding from it, which he had kind of done before. Which, again, is a whole controversy on that. Because, again, it's nice to keep the wars off of our shores, but also you need to help out people and stuff. So it's balance.
But at the same time, I think the United States does not have a good reputation in the international community, specifically because our government has its fingers in so many different pies, doing things like the CIA installing dictators in like Latin American countries, and that's barely even scratching the surface, So I think Trump kind of reflects more or less the will of the American people that, hey, we don't want to be known as the the world's as the Karen of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely a thing. And the thing, too, is like with the U.S., obviously, every 4 years is the potential for a policy change. So like Afghanistan, we end up pulling out of there and leaving, basically, screwing over our allies and leaving them like, oh, you guys are on your own. With that one, we screwed up even more. But typically we have that reputation. Anybody who's studied history at all, even Vietnam, we like, oh, we're here to help you, blah, 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 blah. We make things worse. And then, oh, now we got to go. See you guys later. Hope you guys all make it all right,
Yeah,
it's
like, we declared victory and then pulled out.
Yeah, it's like, have fun. Yeah, it's like, and then, yeah, just then the people who worked with us all usually end up getting slaughtered. And then we wonder why they get mad at us. And again, like I said, the whole, even like Osama bin Laden, that whole thing is like, we had propped up Osama bin Laden at a certain point, and encouraged him and trained him and taught him all this stuff. And then again, comes back and turns around on us. Because again, at the moment it was a good idea. And then later it did not work out as a good idea. And so it's just one of those things where it's a difficult balance. Because the other thing is like, the more that we pull out of areas, then that more China kind of goes into those areas. And so then they become, or China or Russia, typically China at the moment, though, has been really good at taking over special areas, like especially like Africa. Many areas in Africa, they've been getting their fingers in, as well as Afghanistan. We pulled out of Afghanistan. China actually sent a bunch of people there to teach the Taliban how to fly the helicopters and do all this and that, and trade for the mines for all those rare earth minerals and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And as well as China, when they usually come in, like Africa in particular, they help out these poor countries. They give them really cheap technology and all this stuff. And then you kind of get a big influence on that. And if you think of it, it's like if you're giving them the technology, you can easily put spyware and stuff in there so you know what's going on in the country and then you can control it. And I just think of like how us particularly, and like any other country too, like once you get reliant on technology, it's really hard to get away from it. It's like telephone communication makes things like so much nicer. The internet is amazing. You can learn all sorts of stuff on the internet. Again, some stuff you don't want to learn, but it's like, so I think we're eventually going to get to a point too, as far as like learning stuff on the internet, like we're potentially talking about it later too, but the Olympics and how some of the misinformation during the Olympics, because there's so much information out there that it's hard nowadays, especially with AI and all that stuff, to decipher what is real and what isn't real. Because again, we all have lives to live. We don't always have time to surf through the internet all the time to get actual facts. And so I'm intrigued to see how that all ends up playing out in the long run, as far as, again, with AI in particular, that it makes it harder to detect fakes and stuff like that. And so we're eventually going to have to get to a point where we don't trust the internet at all. So
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting conundrum we could end up in.
Yeah. Actually, I kind of do want to talk about the Olympics for a little bit.
Okay.
Because the Olympics it's kind of a shit show this year. I mean, holy crap. Like, you start off with that weird, like, Last Supper-esque thing with trannies.
Yeah.
Like, that was odd, right? And I found it so funny that the moment people started complaining that it was disrespectful or whatever, or mocking God and all that stuff, that the media quickly swoops in and says, no, it wasn't a take on The Last Supper. It was,
This Greek painting,
a recreation of the painting of, I think, Bacchus.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Which is basically the Roman equivalent of Dionysus.
Yeah.
The god of wine and mirth and
Yeah.
merriment. So, that weird blue guy, he wasn't Jesus. He was Dionysus.
Yeah.
But, it's like they're trying to gaslight us because you look at the, what the people responsible for the display itself.
Yeah.
They actually mentioned The Last Supper when they were talking about it. And the actual, title for it, it was in French, but the title, when translated into English, translates something like The Last Supper on the River Seine or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's really weird how we're in this kind of situation where it's almost like the powers that be don't want us to reject the things that we see with our, that we can clearly see, that we can clearly perceive. It's like they want us to reject those or question those, which makes sense because then if we're constantly questioning the things that we can clearly see and clearly perceive, then we're going to be easier to control.
Yeah. And that is one of the weird things with everything, because even up to this point, I think the kind of all came to a pinnacle kind of during COVID. Was again, telling us that what you're seeing is not what you're seeing, which then makes you doubt yourself. Is am I going crazy, or is the rest of the world going crazy? It's and then even kind of the controversy in the Olympics this year with the boxing girls. Have you seen that one?
Oh yeah, that was a whole.
Now apparently there's. I just saw this afternoon was that they're saying that no, it actually is a girl, and so I'm like, well, is it actually a girl, or are you just saying that's actually a girl type thing? And so all that part. Right? And if you look at Wikipedia, it said everything has changed, everything is she even from a child, but I mean that's easy enough to change through Wikipedia. So it's I was diving into that because somebody posted something about you all jumped on the anti-trans wagon, and it really is just a girl or whatever, but it's I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes, if it is actually a girl or a guy, which again is then we're getting to that point because of technology, because of medical abilities like that. We're able to make guys look more like girls or whatever, and also with everybody using not supplements, but steroids and all that stuff, you got a lot of girls who are more physical, a lot more bigger and stuff like that too. But it's definitely one of those things that kind of makes you go, again, question your own sanity or whatever. Because again, if you're trying to decide if a person is actually a guy or a girl and they're in a girl sport or a guy sport, it's obviously not usually works out as well the other way around. But a guy in a girl sport, it's if you're heads and toes above people and you're dominating, it's is that because you're actually a male, or is that because actually you just worked really hard? Because there's a couple of the events where there's been quite a few records broken. There was one person who was a swimming record, or I think it was a girl, and she was way ahead of everybody, crazy amount ahead of everyone. And so it's just one of those things that makes you go, are you using some sort of steroids or what? Because you were these are the best athletes in the world, and you're leaving them in the dust. It's that's kind of
Are you talking about what's her name? Katie Ledecky, the swimmer?
I think it was, yeah. She went 10 minutes or something, wasn't she? Ahead or 10 seconds?
Yeah, it was crazy. She's, I don't know very much about her, but I have heard she has been just doing far and away way better than anybody else. But then at the same time, she's actually
she's biologically a woman. Yeah.
She's biologically a woman. She doesn't have that Leah Thomas character to compete against, and I can imagine that if she went up against, say, Michael Phelps, she probably wouldn't do quite so well. You know?
Totally. Yeah, that's the whole reason why they have different gender sports, is because guys and girls typically are not in the same physical arena per se, as far as able to perform the same amount of stuff.
As particularly egregious for boxing too. So, because I think the it's something like men on average are capable of hitting like 2.6 times harder than the average woman.
Yeah.
That is an insane difference.
Yeah.
And so in boxing, there's already a clear reason for categorization in sports in general, but in boxing, that reason for categorization is like way more obvious,
Yeah.
because not only can men hit way harder than women can, it's, you have the possibility of like someone actually getting severely injured or killed greatly magnified by allowing cross-gender fighting. And so it's kind of interesting how this whole boxing thing is played out, because it's like they're basically trying to gaslight us,
Yeah.
They've done all this work to make people question, oh, what is a woman? What is the difference between a man and a woman? And then they've pushed this idea that trans women are real women, and then when we see someone who clearly looks like a dude, clearly fights like a dude, beating up on women in Olympic boxing, the natural response, given everything we've experienced in the culture, is like, oh, that must be a transgender boxer. And then boom, 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 gotcha, bigot.
Yeah.
She's biologically female.
Yeah.
But even that's kind of up in the air too, because the people who know whether this boxer is biologically female or not aren't actually giving us the information that we need to make that determination.
Yeah.
So there's basically the International Boxing Association is saying that, which they, the Olympics had severed their relationship with the IBA.
Okay.
So the Olympic Committee created their own organization to govern Olympic boxing.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the standards of Olympic boxing was, well, does it say female on the passport? Then bam, they're a woman. But the IBA actually does do some kind of testing, but they won't say what kind of testing it is. But we can infer from the information that we do have that more than likely this person has XY chromosomes.
Yeah.
Which means that they're not biologically female after all, even though they might have been raised as a female. Like they might have the external female plumbing.
Yeah.
And, prior to puberty, basically that's the only way you can tell.
Yeah.
So obviously they don't have all that transgender, gender neutral nonsense in Algeria.
Yeah.
So when she came out of the womb and the doctor checked between her legs and said, oh, those are girl parts, so they raised her as a girl.
Yeah.
But then when, she hit puberty, those XY chromosomes went to work, and she didn't develop like a normal woman.
Yeah. Which, is, again, the thing too is, again, there are certain women, who push themselves, again, this whole thing with the athletes, you're spend your whole lifetime pushing yourself for this moment, basically, in the Olympics. And so in many ways, it just is kind of disingenuous to have a guy come in there as a woman, say, oh, I'm a woman, and then just dominate, whereas like in the male field, they would have, they still have done decent, but they probably wouldn't, be in the top 10, it's like,
yeah. And I mean, like, the degree to which they've dominated the Olympic boxing is absurd. Like, they went against, I think their first match was against Italy, if I remember correctly. And so that match lasted like 46 seconds.
Yeah.
And the Italian boxer, she gave up.
Yeah.
Because in her words, she said she had never been hit that hard in her entire life.
Yeah.
And she felt that this was a good time to call it quits.
Yeah.
Because, she obviously feared for her life at that point.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like, it's not fair to all the, like, females who are actually hormone and physique-wise are actually female.
Yeah.
It's not fair to them. But it's also kind of interesting because it's not really fair to this other boxer either, because it's like they didn't ask to be born with this condition.
Yeah.
And, so it's kind of an interesting situation. And unfortunately, the Olympic Committee, I guess, doesn't really care. And they're just like, yeah, it says female on her passport, so whatever, right?
That's what we're going with, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to say, the world we're in. And again, with modern technology and how that changes things to conversations you had previously before you could physically change things. It wasn't it was, like I said, pretty much what's between the legs. It's like, are you a boy or a girl? It's like, nowadays you can change all that. And so it definitely makes it more challenging, I would say, would be the saying.
Yeah, to me, it's almost like, because, the Bible talks a lot about men and women remaining distinct,
Yeah.
It says multiple times, male and female, he created them. And then you have passages like in 1 Corinthians, it talks about women wearing head coverings while they pray or prophesy. And the way a lot of people interpret that is Paul speaking about the cultural context of head coverings in the first century being a symbol of femininity. And he's warning people to not use the newfound liberty that they have as Christians to erase the differences between man and woman, because God created men and women distinct for a reason.
Yeah.
And you see in normal, healthy families, it's not like women have to be like barefoot and pregnant. This isn't like The Handmaid's Tale or whatever. But in healthy families, there is a division of labor between men and women.
Yes.
And there's certain characteristics that men generally have and certain characteristics that females generally have. And in normal, healthy families, these complement each other. And it's, it works out for good. But now you see we've sort of moved past that as a society. And now people, I think as a result, people are just growing up confused, They're coming into society with, like they sort of have to invent meaning for their existence. They have to invent a purpose for their life because society has become so far removed from God's created order that we've just erased all that and basically turned humans into some kind of blank slate that we can manipulate,
Yeah. It's very interesting with that. Before, societies, if they tended to go like gay or lesbian like that, it's like there wasn't a way to reproduce, so that society would just simply die, because you'd have to bring more people in as the only way to continue on that society, because you can't reproduce. Whereas nowadays with technology and stuff, at least if you have females, you can reproduce. Guys we haven't mastered that yet to figure out how to make guys reproduce. But it definitely adds a layer now, again, with technology and how far we've come with that. And just, again, how amazing that is, but also how scary that is. And again, getting closer and closer to, I feel, the ultimate thing of us, declaring ourselves gods, because we're getting, which I think is one of the other layers too with AI, as well as, just with technology, is that we're getting to the point where we can do so much amazing stuff which was one of the reasons, why God had done Tower of Babel when we were building that tower. He's like, these guys can do anything. He's like, I have to separate them, mess up their language, make it more difficult. And so it's taken us pretty much this amount of time to finally get to the point where we can communicate with enough people in the world easily that now we're doing all this crazy technological stuff, which again is amazing. But yeah, I always think back to the Jurassic Park thing. It's like we've been so excited about whether we should or whether we can do this and not think about should we do this.
I know, yeah.
It's like Goldblum. And,
yeah, good old Jeff Goldblum. Yeah, that's kind of interesting too. The whole Tower of Babel thing, because I think a lot of people read that story and sort of get the mistaken idea that God is somehow like afraid of humanity.
Yeah.
And he has to keep us down, I mean, basically it's the same lie that the serpent told Eve.
Yeah.
It's like God's afraid that if you eat this fruit, you'll become like him, so it's not like it's a new idea by any means, but yeah, people have this idea that like they read the Tower of Babel story and it's like, oh yeah, God was afraid of humanity and he had to keep them down so they didn't, overcome him or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think the more accurate take would be that God was afraid for humanity.
Yeah.
Because, we don't have, like, the Tower of Babel was so long ago, we don't have any idea what that time was like. So there's not really a comparison we can draw, but we can just look at the way things are going today and can clearly infer that if we continue going in this direction, that some not so nice things are going to happen.
Totally.
Like you even have movies that are made with this very premise in mind, like The Matrix.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting how relevant that movie can be. It was from like 99, right?
Yeah.
So like 25 years old and it's still relevant because like when Morpheus tells the story of humanity to Neo, he basically tells a story of humanity. They gave birth to AI.
Yeah.
And so you can infer that essentially humans thought of themselves as gods at that point in time.
Totally.
And the ultimate expression of everything they had achieved up to that point was to be able to create this thing which was a sentient intelligence, whereas it wouldn't have been possible to create that sort of thing anymore. And what happened? That artificial intelligence turned against them and enslaved them all.
Yeah.
So it's like, if we don't correct our course, unfortunately, we're probably headed to something very similar. And the people living in the time of the Tower of Babel were probably headed to something very similar as well.
Yeah.
And clearly God, the Tower of Babel wasn't, I don't remember the timeline exactly, but it wasn't that long after the flood, Yeah. So it was like, because the flood happened, it receded, Noah got off the ark, humanity kind of stayed in the same spot.
Yeah.
And then they grew to a point where they could accomplish anything. Well, obviously God didn't want his, society to go extinct or whatever might have happened to them that early on. He still had plans for them.
Yeah.
So he had to do something in order to cause them to go on a different course than the one they were already headed,
Yeah, because the other thing too with that is, I think it was Nimrod who was, I think the king of that. He was bringing it all together. He was bringing everybody to one point and trying to keep everybody there. And the whole thing was that after Adam and Eve, God had told them to spread out and to take over the earth, to subdue the earth. Which again, not to destroy it, but to manage and tend it and like all that stuff. Because the time we tend to think of we just want the resources, blah 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 blah. But I don't think most people ultimately just want the resources. You still want it to be a pretty area. You want all that stuff. So I think that stuff comes into play. But it's like one of the things with the Tower of Babel was too, it was bringing everybody together to one point, so they weren't spreading out anymore. And so the goal was to actually spread them out as well, was the other aspect of it. So again, like many things in the Bible, has multiple, I feel, connotations and meanings that come from the different things in it, which is probably the reason why we read it multiple times and can get or a bigger picture every time we read it and stuff like that. That's definitely very interesting with that. But yeah, we're coming, like you said, I think to another point of that where man's getting to the little big for his britches.
Yeah.
Which again, we've had many times where we've done that, and then obviously then some catastrophic thing usually happens, a volcano erupts, or, Rome was pretty cocky of themselves, and then all fell apart.
Yep.
Because again, like we talked about earlier, we were all flawed, and so eventually we end up breaking things. Like even the best things.
Yeah. I guess what remains to be seen is, can we actually course correct before something catastrophic happens, or are we just bound for catastrophe at this point, Yeah,
because that's the other thing too, like you and I have talked about quite a bit is before offline, is that AI isn't really AI like we think of it nowadays. Right now, we're still kind of it can just regurgitate our information. So it's much more of like an assistant versus it can only use what we've already created. It can't create its own thing yet. So we're still not at that point yet where AI is sentient, I feel, as far as can make its own mind up, or, we haven't created something bigger than ourselves. At the moment, all it is a giant, as I said, data analyzer, basically. And it takes all the data, which, again, it can do a lot faster than we can, which is super helpful for different things and setting things up. And so it's a great assistant, but it's not at the point yet where it thinks for itself and all that stuff, even though people try to say it is and all that. It's like, it's not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we're able to get it to that point, one, and two, if we course correct enough to fix that. And not be, It definitely is very tempting at that point, to think that you are God, especially if you make something that is smarter than yourself, which would be kind of, a weird thing anyways, making something technically smarter than yourself. Which I think is also like you were talking about with God, everybody's interpretation that, God was scared, of man being so smart and all this stuff. It's like we tend to, I think, inflate the like Greek mythology and all that stuff, where the gods kind of despised humans, and we're always kind of more in competition with them, kind of messing with them and all that stuff. Whereas like God's not in competition with us. Again, he created everything, and so he is actually just wants to be in a relationship with us, and we have to keep ourselves humble and realize that everything is created. So even the stuff that we make, it's all from created things that God made. So he's above it. He's not actually, in that mess. He's like, he made it all. So he's above all things. So.
Yeah. And it's like, however far we advance as a species, we're finite creatures.
Yeah.
And God is infinite.
Yeah.
It's, but there's no closing that gap.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I said that I just love about like going out at night and seeing the stars and stuff like that is one of those things. It's one of those things that just humbles you, because throughout life I've realized, I think it was probably actually back when I was in the military, I'd realized that I have a tendency to get very prideful, at least of myself, of what I can do, what I can accomplish, and all that stuff. And I need to find ways in life to humble myself, to keep myself humble, which is one of the reasons I actually really enjoy like jujitsu or any of that type of thing, is because there's always somebody who's bigger, stronger than you. And it just is a super humbling thing for me. And so I had to find ways in life to get humbled where, again, not to hurt myself per se, but to remind me that I'm not all that in a bag of chips. And sometimes even just look at the stars, though, as one of those ways of doing that. That, there's all this stars stuff that God created, the whole universe and universes, and he still made you, and you're still important to him, but you're still just like a little blip, on the world. But again, he made you specifically, though, to be here for a reason. Again, I feel everybody's here, to spread the word of God and tell others about him. But it's for us to find out what our calling is in that aspect, again, which part of the body we are as far as that.
And that's really the amazing thing about God too, is like, we're not just little blips. We're like blips on a blips on a blip on a blip,
100 years
in the
ain't that
grand
long,
scheme
yeah.
of things. But then, when Jesus is talking about, like, people worrying about their life and about provision and whatnot, he says, "Don't you know that the very hairs on your head are numbered?"
Yeah.
So it's like, we're like the tiniest, most insignificant thing you could possibly imagine in the universe. And yet God cares so deeply about us that not even one hair falling out of our head could escape his notice, you know?
Which is crazy. It's just crazy. It's like, one of those things that's, I think, beyond our human comprehension as far as, that is just amazing.
I also heard something kind of interesting last week, which really, it really put into perspective, it seems like we're just like this random ball spinning around a random star in a random galaxy. It's like this, the Earth is special as far as we can tell, at least.
Yeah.
But it might turn out not to be all that special once our capacity to analyze extrasolar planets improves. But, the sun is a rather unremarkable star.
Yeah.
And the Milky Way is a rather unremarkable galaxy. And we're not even like the bright center of the Milky Way. We're like way out on the edge, We're like in the boonies of the Milky Way.
But it's the Goldilocks zone. Yeah.
But so apparently this summer, or I think it's this summer, yeah, or this year, there's a star that is about to go nova.
Oh, really?
I mean, it already went nova, but
About to catch up to us. Yeah, we're finally
finally going to see it. And so it's just it's not a supernova, it's just a regular nova where this white dwarf accumulates a bunch of gas from a red giant that it's a part of a binary system with.
Okay.
And then eventually that gas pressure builds, and then at some point it ignites and it gets all blown off in a giant explosion. And that's not a that's more powerful than anything we can possibly imagine, and that's just a regular nova.
Yeah.
And this star is I think 2,600 light years away.
Dang.
So it's and it's only a regular nova, so it's not even remotely a danger to us.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious. I did some digging on how close would a star have to be where if it went supernova, it would actually affect us. And I found out something really interesting. So I guess a star going supernova produces enormous amounts of light.
Okay.
So a supernova is when a white dwarf that's accumulating material is beyond a certain size threshold.
Okay.
It does the same process. It accumulates the material, but instead of just igniting in a flash and blowing all that excess material off, because it's of a certain mass, what happens is its own the energy that it's producing can no longer resist gravitational force of its own mass, so it collapses in on itself.
Okay.
And produces an explosion that's so bright that a star-going supernova, to our eyes, is as bright as the galaxy that star is in.
Wow.
And the thing is, most supernovas that have happened have been like in different galaxies, so
Yeah,
they're
totally,
like
yeah.
millions of light years away. And so we've only observed it from afar. But what's interesting is if a supernova were to occur within our own galaxy, as far as I can tell, we have about 100 light year sort of radius.
Okay.
That as long as it's outside of that, we're safe. It would like light up the night sky. It would be completely obvious, but as long as it's outside of that sort of 100 light year bubble, we're not going to get irradiated,
Nice. Okay.
Whereas like if it was within that
100 light years.
100 light year bubble, like the entire surface of the planet would become irradiated and all life would perish.
Dang.
Basically. So it's it's a pretty catastrophic thing. So it's kind of really interesting how we're basically in like a safe zone.
Yeah.
Like there's stars which are kind of close from like a cosmic perspective that are projected to go supernova sometime. But as far as anyone can tell, we're kind of like in this almost like safe zone where all the stars within about 100 light years of us, none of them are in any danger of going supernova.
Okay.
So it's like stuff that we can't even imagine,
Yeah,
it's like where God still set everything up so that, we have our own little special place in the universe.
Yeah, which is crazy. It's hard to, except that, it was all just chance, like the billions of times of chance, and then everything just happened to work out this one time. Yeah, definitely. I feel, leads to the conclusion that there has to be a creator.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's just way too complicated, I feel, just for chance.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, too, is that I've noticed is because growing up, I think we're always conditioned to like, science is objective, empirical.
Yeah.
And, religious belief is backwards and superstitious.
Yeah.
And even as believers, I think we get like conditioned to sort of play by their rules, so to speak.
Totally.
We're trying to like prove our case to non-believers, but we're like operating under their definitions, I feel like most of the time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting how in recent years, the mask has kind of come off, and it's becoming clear that for a lot of people, science is no longer an objective practice, but it's just another religion.
Yeah, totally. And as I said, we can make anything pretty much into a religion. And that's one of the problems, again, with us, is that, anything we make into religion, anything we put above God is idolatry. And that we can pretty much put anything above God, because pretty much anything we put above God, though, is created. So it's something that God created. I was just reading this actually in the scriptures I was reading this morning. I think it was Isaiah's. I was reading a couple different ones, but in Isaiah, it was talking about that and how the earth, everything is created and everything belongs to, God made it all. And so anything that man creates is already a created item. And so you're trying to put that above the creator. That's idolatry. It's like, and it's easy to do with anything. Again, You can even do it with people, which that was kind of a hard one for me. It was like realizing that, yeah, you can put people above. I mean, obviously, you have like a Julius Caesar or, something like that who you're like, oh, they're like a god, but it's like, I think nowadays we're a little less likely to elevate people to that status. But in some ways, I mean, we still do, because then, people get obsessed with like Kardashians or something like that, and if you're putting them, anything that you focus more time on than you focus on God becomes an idol.
Yeah, and we kind of do that on a smaller scale too, because sometimes, people come into our lives at an opportune moment, and they speak into our lives, and they help us along, and we kind of put them on a pedestal,
Totally.
and we kind of put them almost in the place of God sometimes. And the temptation is easy to do. If someone's really helped you, especially in matters of faith, you have this tendency, you're going to see them, you're almost going to associate them with your faith.
Totally.
And if you're not careful, you can get to a place where subconsciously, where you don't even realize it at first, you're starting to believe that these people can do no wrong.
Yeah.
Because they've been so great and they've helped you so much. And then all of a sudden, when they fall short, that, your whole world collapses.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. That's happened quite a few times, like a pastor basically, kind of sometimes can hold the church together. So then when that pastor either retires or moves on, that can shake certain people's say religion, because again, they've, like you're saying, they put their trust in this person and their interpretation of things and all that instead of actually putting it in God. I was blessed. Luckily, most of my role models all failed me at a young age. So I was like, learned probably by junior high that everyone basically, nobody is to the same level as God, and so God's the only one that will never fail you. Because I said probably junior high. There was this guy who was in like high school who I just totally look up to, and then he did high schooler things and went down some trails that weren't the best, and it kind of really shattered my life at that point. And I mean, it's still okay to have those role models, have people you look up to in certain aspects. But yeah, it's like when you start to idolize them or put them, like you're saying, either up to equivalent with or above God, then it can definitely distract and lead you astray.
I think we're getting about to the hour and a half mark, so I think this is probably a good time for us to close this episode down.
Okay.
So yeah, I just like to just kind of end things with thanking you for coming on and being a part of this, lending your voice to the conversation that is Snarp Fangle.
I appreciate the invitation and really enjoyed my time here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And and for all of you listening at home, we appreciate that you give us your time and your viewership, and Snarp Fangle on. Bye-bye now.